This is August 28, 1984. I'm Joe Todd. This is an interview with Mrs. Virginia Watson Thomas. Mrs. Thomas, where were you born?
I was born in Oklahoma, Okmulgee County.
And when's your birthday?
December 10th, 1908.
And who's your father?
Sandy Watson.
Sandy Watson. And your mother?
Anna Howell McIntosh.
What kind of work did your father do?
He was a cattle raiser, rancher, hereford cattle, northeast of Dustin.
In Okmulgee County.
Yes, northwest of Dustin.
Okay. And you were born on the ranch?
Oh, yes.
Okay. What were your chores on the ranch as a little girl?
I think taking care of myself mostly. Taking care of myself, and then perhaps seeing about my pony sometime. And taking care of my room. That was all.
Okay.
We had a lot of help.
What blood quantum Greek are you?
7/16.
7/16. Is that on your mother's side?
Both.
Both. Have you heard any removal stories about the Trail of Tears?
Yes, I have. It's handed down, straight down, and I knew my great-grandmother, my maternal great-grandmother, who made the walk when she was a teenager.
What did she say about the removal? What stories would she tell you?
Well, she, of course, didn't tell me because I was small, but she would give me things that were given to her, and she had managed to pack small things like a little silver bell she brought from there. That was in my possession. And she told me about her little dogs that all had French names because she was part French. My great-grandmother, of course. My grandmother was dead, but my great-grandmother lived.
And do you remember any stories in particular that they would say about?
Yes, she talked about the hardships in that. They were the gruesome things which left an impression on me, and about their hardships in obtaining food, the food that they were accustomed to. They were agriculture people, people who had gardens in the warm Southland in Alabama. That's where they were from. They had, the Tallapoosa County was nearby, of course. They weren't exactly all in there. My mother's people weren't, but my father's were. Tallapoosa County, but grandmother Abby Lowell, grandmother Abby Lowell was the one who would tell me about the nice little things and the plants that she had obtained some way. People had exchanged plants and vines that they had brought. In what way, I don't remember if I were ever told. But they had Madeira vines and things of that sort that did not exist in this country at that time. But she had what we would call a patio today in her, between two large log houses. And that was rather a backyard thing, which was a patio where everybody met. And that Madeira vine went clear across and formed an arbor. And then she had lilacs, white lilacs, which did not exist here at all. Then they had a plum that was rare. They have grown wild now, but they're all around Head State Park. That was part of her estate. down in, of course you've been there. So her remains lie with a tall tombstone at campground number 4 as you enter, make the entrance there. It's just to the left as you enter. And she had a large home there, there were 3 different buildings there. But they had so many things, plants and things that the other people on my paternal side did not grow. And that's because 40 miles today even makes a difference in what they raise and what they can do there. However, that's been stopped because of our beautiful Fountainhead Park, which is a memorial to my maternal side of the house. I love it because of that. Mm-hmm. But she would tell about sometimes they would step up the pace in their removal. They came by boats a lot. And then, of course, on the riverbanks, they'd come to the riverbanks at intervals, the men and people who were carrying things in wagons and whatever else they had, drags, I believe they said drags. I never did know quite what that was. Indian poles, no. They had something else, but I don't remember. But the women, a lot of the women and children rode in boats. And presumably up the Mississippi River. And then when they have tributaries, like maybe the Arkansas, and that was a vicious river. And she talked about the Arkadelphia, and she used to say something like that, you know. And then she was very handy with the French names because she was familiar with them. And to what extent, of course, that was just something to me, you know. I was 5 years old when she died in 1913. But I remember well, she had pretty blue eyes and was as white as anybody. And on the roll, she was placed as an Indian because they had become wise. And they would be restricted and no taxes. They had known that already in Alabama. Just the short time they lived there were after the white people began to sectionize the land there as they were preparing them to put them in a compound. If they didn't agree to go, that's the way they did. And that's the way they went to Georgia, was in the compound. Now history is very light on that when they begin to tell why some of them were just over the line in Georgia. But that was today. Some of the people who are going out for higher degrees, masters, I think, touched upon it first, and now the PhDs go after it a lot, you know, people with special creative work, creative writing, and researchers go into that, of course.
When did the removal begin? What year, do you?
Well, it began in the 30s, 1830s. The movement began before that, but we'd have to go back and check research. Because there was a little, it was scattered more. They began working on those who rebelled a lot. And then they worked with those who finally saw that they were defeated. They offered them this and they offered them that. Of course, they gave the Cherokees that they were favored because I guess they knew, they were wise enough to know it was going to happen anyway, and part of our people saw that too. And even the Civil War was beginning and the plantations were beginning to develop with the permission of the Department of Interior, you know. Such as it was at that time. I don't know if they even called it that. I'm sure they did some way. And they began to lease or take over what was not being used on the lease basis, you know. They had to have more money. And so it's pretty hard. I have read so much on this, and it's very difficult to just pinpoint just what year, but 1832 seems to be when the migration began, the removal, whether it was just from one place to another in Alabama so they could compound them, that is, put them together to finally finalize this. Some rebelled so much, and then at some time the ones who were rebelling, of course you know about William McIntosh and relative, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And of course they were both
Tell me about him, about William McIntosh.
well, the ones who were opposed and the ones who had agreed to, now he lived in another part of, let's see, I guess he was in Georgia. And pardon Mississippi, he married a planter's, not a planter, I mean, what am I trying to say, a plantation owner, his daughter. And he double-crossed both sides, the ones who didn't want to go and the ones who had finally agreed to make the move. And they ran him into his house and burned the house down. Of course, that was his own people did this. But this is so little that I know, other than that I'd have to go back and review just what it was, because I studied about this in the university as well. That's the only place I had a wide span. And I heard it by legendary means from my own people, but to me, just the very sharp, bad things and the little petty things that appeal to a child when I was hearing it firsthand. My Watson relatives, my grandfather was dead when I was born. Grandfather Watson, but he kept accurate account. He was secretary to the Creek Council here. He was a quarter Indian. His brothers, of course, they spoke Creek too. Of course, they thought that was their mother was only Indian, half Indian. They were quarter. And the others were Watson, who came from Virginia with the government, worked down into Alabama. And the Indian, the 5 civilized tribes, those are the ones that worked with. And when they saw these half-breed girls, pretty girls, and Fanny Naoki was my Indian maternal ancestor, my grandmother, great-grandmother, and she was paternal, I guess, say maternal as my father's grandmother, but she was just half, and maybe not that, I don't know, but she was red-headed, and then red-headed on down, So it's mixed up, and they had the most accurate history as far as my immediate knowledge, because we grew up in this section. Now you just cross down here just a little way, just a little past Morris, and in here too, all in here, the McIntoshes start over there, and then Grandma Abby's, the McCombs, some of those are related to me. In fact, they are related. And those people, now we're all in the same boat, because most of the McCombs who are living now are younger than I. So we were raised over on this side, and I'm more educated, and I have the program, the Family Bible. Now there was a preface page there that told exactly. Now there was a Randolph County at one time in Virginia. I don't know about that now, but that's where my father's white relatives came from, Scottish, of course. And they came down in there with the war. And then when the Civil War came, well, that's going beside the point. But when the Civil War came, then one of my grandfathers, Grandpa Paul McIntosh, was a Confederate, and the other one was a Union soldier.
What was his name? The Union?
David Watson, David Crockett Watson, and he was the Union soldier. So I have the buttons on his uniform.
Do you have any stories about the Civil War, about what they did in the war?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
What did they do in the war? What have you heard about the Civil War?
Well, I guess hardship. is what I heard most. Now, of course, Grandpa Watson got in. They both got in on it. And when they reached this far into Oklahoma, now there's a difference. The Loyal Creeks, of course, now was this part of the country, you know. But I suppose now that part. Now, my father was born just a little after the Civil War, 1876. And so, anyway, he was in better stead. He was with the Union Army, but they suffered too out in here. They were cut off from their main branches of service, and the people out here were not. They didn't have enough arms. They didn't have enough backup, as we would call it today. That we didn't have anyone back of them, or whatever you say in the service now, on the ground service. About doing this, they had to forage for themselves a lot. Now that's where people out in here really got a bad name, soldiers, because they had to forage for themselves. And as long as they were in Missouri and part of Kansas and that, they were all right, and northern Arkansas. But southern Arkansas now, that was a different story. And eventually they took over, and they had to be in Missouri. Of course, you know that. Of course, I know the Civil War back and forward from the beginning. But Grandpa McIntosh told my mother often when they would rebel at the table on eating certain foods. My people were pretty well off on both sides, and when they would rebel and deny at eating food, they'd deny themselves. They'd say they didn't want this. They were picky, in other words, choicey. And he would just stop and tell them that he wouldn't tell them exactly what all they ate because it was awful. I couldn't stand to hear it. But he would tell them about eating acorns, and they would fight over it. They'd shake or throw sticks at acorns, you know, and anything that had, they thought, food value. Some were poisoned because the food was wild. Food was fruit or nuts were not edible, you know. So he used to tell us about that, and they would kill frogs and turtles, which were edible, you know, and they had been used to that sort of thing. But the food and their shoes, their clothing were just, those, of course, just in shreds. But other than that, the horses went without blankets because they had to make some kind of a breech clout, you know, when their pants would wear out and they had still something left while they'd make breech clouts. And that's about the only thing we can think of that they ever wore. In fabrics, just fabrics, because they had these traders coming down through there in the 16th century, and they had agricultural things. They had wild fruit that they could trade. They had animals. They had, tamed wild pigs, you know, and things to these people who came, and that's why the Spanish have a tocino for any kind of bacon. And in Creek, it's tocina.
Yeah.
A lot of words in Creek are just the same. Vaca in Spanish, guava in Creek. Mm-hmm. And just lusty, we mean that robust and, you know, vigorous. Mm-hmm. And lusty in Spanish means something else. So these things, now, it's interesting, of course, speech is mine. Yeah. You know, of course, I guess Gary told you that, speech and drama. And that has always been an interesting thing for me. Now that part of it is the deprivation through which they went, you know. Mm-hmm. And, of course, now that, I think, must have been a disciplinary move in all along when they would tell them those severe things, that they had so much more. We had it too. And my father wasn't so much to visit that upon us as my mother was, because she'd heard it so much. And, of course, the Confederates were the ones who really were bad off, and they hated the Negro. They had slaves. Now, my paternal side of the house did not. They did not have slaves.
Mm-hmm.
The Watsons never had a slave. And as far as back as they know, but Grandma Abby had them, and that's why they had those little houses way off, I remember. And she didn't have them near the springs, though they had some beautiful springs there, sandy loam and everything. And she had, I remember there were 7 two-room log houses, and well-built, strong things. And where there had been low porticos in back, now I'll talk Southern a little bit to you. And they had all kinds of vines. They liked the arbors, with the vines over them, wild grapevines.
And those are the slave quarters?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. They had that there, of course, now there's where we paid and paid until our new Constitution. We filed on the Constitution Commission and saw to it that we got that in and got it passed.
Good.
Yeah, because we had shared with people who were, they were just, they'd go to some old Negro who had a linkage to enrollment, an enrollment number, and they would give them so much money. Yeah, I heard about that a long time. And for the first money we got here, about way back in the 50s, I got 33 cents the first round. I put in my savings account and started a savings account. The next month I put 66 cents in it, 99 cents, and I'd start over again. And then luck would have it that on one of my checks I got $3.33, and then I thought I'd played enough, so I started doing that with the dollars, and put $3.33, 66, $9.99, and then come back, and I still have that.
Good.
That's the way I do. So anyway, they'd get in there and they'd get in on these things. They'd get benefits. Of course, we didn't have these benefits that we have today. Thank goodness to the presidents that have come along, and the wise legislators, congressmen who've gone and fought it out for us. They have seen that the Department of Interior and Indian Affairs were greatly. Western senators, I think, have had an awful lot to do with this.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I wonder about our Oklahoma senators. They see us so much. They see us as we are, as the average Creek. Now, I'm talking about the Creeks. And I know the others, too. I went to school at Stillwater, where there were a lot of different tribes who would finally make it, Cherokees a lot and Pawnees. But they go out here, they're not satisfied. They took a whole morning here with the Nova group. And these Easterners and Northerners come down here. They send a group, of course that's their way of doing. And they came and interviewed me last summer about this time, the 2 girls, and they were lovely. They were lovely girls. And then they brought back a whole video crew one Sunday morning. We had coffee and donuts, and I was rather ill toward the end of the summer. But I had open house for them, and they just tore up the house in general, getting their equipment in here. You know how that goes. I used to do that, too, with my equipment at school. When we'd go in and borrow something with actual background, to put on a play, Well, we used to have to go back and just fix it all up beautiful and leave a good household present for them. Well, anyway, we didn't do that here. I was glad to. And do you know they went down there and picked out a picture that they had. The same CHR driver was here with me. Not my favorite, because she's a lovely girl, but she was the oldest one in service. And so she said, what do they want all of just this little dab for, Am I coming across all right?
Yes, ma'am. Fine.
So they had Ethel in there, but they cut it out because I knew the type of equipment they had was not accommodated by this power here. Their lighting was bad because it reflected wrong here.
Yeah.
I don't know enough about that to know that was good. But anyway, they wrote me a letter and said our part was cut out because the lighting was bad and blah, blah. But that's not new to me because I was on the Mexican border, you know. We were down there with the immigration.
Mm-hmm.
We had many of these experiences. They'd get the poorest, the sorriest looking, sleepiest looking, no good parents where furniture was broken down. You find entirely a different look down in South El Paso when you go down there, if they have any backbone at all, comparatively. Their houses have nice furniture inside. They have sleeping equipment in there that you wouldn't know they could pile that many in a family, and it doesn't show in the day when it's made up. Their houses are decorated nicely, not too much, not gaudy, and they have modern stuff. Oh, they used to just, we had a hard time. That is, the people in charge had a difficult time. The immigration officers had a difficult time getting pictures from those people. And we had to have it so that we could get help for these struggling parents who had done a successful job of educating their children under these hardships. Mm-hmm. And because they just couldn't, they wouldn't take that when they got it to Washington. They'd take the poor, no good kind, and they just give them welfare, you know, and it was difficult to get a scholarship for them until in the late 50s. And then 60s, and then they didn't want the establishment then, you know. You remember that deal?
Yes, I remember that.
And you remember how they wouldn't let them come through El Paso and walk just any way down the street like they wanted to. Their clothing and their, dress code was what it amounted to. They'd meet them up there at the line north of El Paso. New Mexico was hard on them too, unless they were off and they wouldn't let them stay in the parks overnight. You know, they just got so hard on them. But anyway, here, that's happened here, and it's and they did that to them too in among the creeks in the South. You know, they never told the things. And when the old people were just going to die anyway, we're sad today because our oldest member from our region down south of here died yesterday afternoon. So we're all sad over that. Martha Tiger, and she and I shared the same birthday. So every year, December 10, her nephew got us together. I taught Billy in high school, grade school and high school. That's the only high school I ever taught that I taught grade school. But I had Billy, and then in high school, when he got to high school, I had him there. So he always put us together and took us in his motor home, and he'd take us around and go take us to interesting places. And we just have a living room on wheels, you know, just have a good time. And he'd always get glasses that didn't quite look like they were household glasses, just to take our pictures, you know. Oh, put apple juice in it to make it look real, you know, and tickling ice cubes and so forth.
How old was Martha Tiger?
95.
95.
Yeah, somebody printed or said 94. I believe it was one of our deacons said when we had a prayer service for her, I guess it will be a month this coming Saturday when we went down. She was so tranquil and peaceful, and I always stopped by to see her when I could, but in recent years she's been hard to catch. Somebody robbed her of her purse. She would let them come in to use a phone, and the lady had to go to the bathroom, and she took her purse. And so so she was afraid that she was a coach not to let anybody in.
Yeah.
But if she had her light on, she was at the door, sitting watching out the window, you know, and she was always doing handwork. Even now she did this. She pieced rails. That's what she could do, but she did little tiny toys and things like that for her children. But anyway, I'm off on another scale. But these older people used to be put in boats, and I guess sent down the Mississippi River and the Arkansas River. Now, that's not clear to me. Now, the way the Indian tells this is that they were put in boats and sent down the river. I can't see a creek permitting that. We take care of our older people. We do it right today better than we ever did. Right here, because we have the administration, and we have a good one. He gets fights, or he gets criticism from all ways, but he's done a mighty good job, and people who believe in him have done this. And we have a new Constitution behind him. Some worked on the Constitution, and it just didn't go over with the judge in Washington, the District of Columbia. So when they appointed four, and finally through a lot of talking and going, they had to exhibit me from here to there and have so many meetings, and we had a time schedule, and I was the only woman. And of course, they wanted to know if I were Indian at all. Imagine Indians asking me that. I just gave them 2 roll numbers, and that was all there was to do. I said, I'll check on that roll number. And it was let's go again. It was here too, and when they had the field service here. But anyway, that's beside the point. But they have a way of saying they put them down indefinite identification, you know, and that I just imagine those mean soldiers that brought them out here, you know, did that. They would rush them someday. Now that's the thing that I remembered so much. And great-grandmother Abby would tell me, she'd say, now, I once had a little silver something, you know, a little knife, I think it was. She thought that knife was something big. And she got a long banana melon of some kind. I never saw one. And she gave it to one of the traders. And so she said, and he spoke French, you know. So I had to ask Mother what that meant in French, and she said, oh, that means French. So she gave him that because he was so nice to her and had given her something long. I've forgotten long ago. And then she had this little item, I've forgotten what that was, that he gave her in return, a little knife. It was a little knife and something more important than that, maybe a little ring or something on it, maybe a key ring or something. And she lost it in her her trip on the Trail of Tears. But she'd tell me about these old people, and she said, well, they didn't have to bathe them after death. I guess they just had their bath when they died, you know. And they would tell children those things, you know, and our people, Watsons, wouldn't tell children things like that, you know. They'd take them up to a certain limit of reality, but then they'd stop certain places, and they were very frank about it. So I have a multiple culture, in other words. But I didn't take French as, I had enough background, I thought, and here I am like a hillbilly down here in the moonshine country. I can speak the language in a way, just a little bit, but I never did try. I took Spanish and university, never realizing I'd spent 30 years on the border teaching high school youngsters.
Whether in the Choctaw and the Cherokee country, they rebuilt some of the plantation homes in Oklahoma, like Rose Hill, R.M. Jones, and the Morrell home, and the Stanwady home, John Ross home.
Oh, yes.
Were there homes like this in the Creek Nation?
Well, yes. Now, the old lady who has just died grew up in 2 log houses. Just grandmother Abby's was different. Great-grandmother Abby's. But Mrs. Scott over at Walika, or that is outside of Walika, the park improvement.
Mm-hmm.
I know my great-grandmother's was. And there was an Indian graveyard there, and that had to be removed. All but those few, and her monument is still there, her grave. It's just a small area, about a little larger than this room. And her stone is still there and it's fenced in. They wouldn't move it because of its historical value. And her children also were there, and some of her children, Grandmother McIntosh now was buried in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, that's the only thing left there, and some of the fruit trees are there. Can you imagine? And the plums are wild. And then I can't remember anything, but in our own vicinity now, there's a log house west of Graham High School, down right at the close to the. There's just a log house, and that was my grand uncle Joe Watson's. Now he had rather a plantation type home, and ours just was a ranch house from the beginning. It had a breezeway too,
Yeah.
but immediately once they began to get more people, Dad took over after my grandmother died. He began to cut out the little houses that were around the yard, and he boxed up the breezeway and made a dining room out of it, and built on and built upstairs and so forth. Well, there's an upstairs there in the first place. So it wasn't typically there, it was just a ranch house. It was a large ranch house.
And the log house is down by Graham School?
Yes, it's still there.
How old is it?
Oh, it was in the 70s, I'm sure. It had to be.
Yeah.
It had to be in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
And people have a white bungalow there. A relative lives there, and her husband, and a very progressive farmer. They had let that go. There's oil on there, you know. There's half production there, but then they, at the same time, they keep that, and he farms that just beautifully. You know, he's a progressive farmer. Well, anyhow, that's just the little log house. It's what we call a smokehouse, you know, and that was attached to the old house, you know. Just as we would build an addition for a storage room. That's kind of only was for the meats and so forth. I remember that quite, and crocks for milk and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, how did they do that anyway? You don't want that part of it. Anyway, they had a way of keeping milk without running water in great big wooden tubs around it. You know, just for a day or two. That's all they could keep it. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a spring farther away from the house where they kept it longer, you know. Anyway, then my aunt's house, down right close to the Hughes County line, close to Dustin, just about 2.5 or maybe 3 miles from Dustin. That's where this lady called from, Ada Brown, called. Now that house was a plantation type place, but all those homes, earlier day homes, were in the flats. They also had divided quarters, the dining room, the kitchen, and then this breezeway where in the summer that was their hallelujah. Sometimes they'd move the table out there and had us mosquito netting over the table when they ate, you know, and that sort of thing. And then of course the screen enclosure became very popular. Then they finally just boxed it in, you know, or moved it away and built another. And that's where they all went. But it was a copy and not an actual one. I just can't, now around perhaps Wetumpka, could have been some, and even that, I wouldn't say they were typical plantation homes. You might have found some down toward Eufaula.
Mm-hmm.
I was talking about Grandmother Abbey. Now they were more southern. That's where the older people lived. And in my part of the place, I'm telling you, the south of Okmulgee here,
Now, there may be somebody here who could tell you about someone here. I was thinking about my aunt who lived out here at Wilson. Uh, she didn't have that kind of house. She didn't have that kind of house. I was going to say she did, but she didn't. She had a small house that somebody else had chosen to build and live out there. And her brother lived there for a while, and he was killed. And finally they put it into a usage storage room and things like that, and a wash house later on. And finally they just removed it altogether. But then they had what I started to say, they had a walkway from the main house over there. But I can't now. I think that Chief Cox, you talked to him yesterday?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. That's when I was trying to get him, when Ella wanted me, his secretary wanted me to tell about Aunt Martha. She was with her aunt. And so, did you ask him this question too about the southern planters?
No, ma'am.
No. But now Mr. Shikoda here is very good on this. Now he might have, he lives up here, I believe.
Well, we're supposed to talk to him.
Oh, well, he asked him about that. This part of it, when I was a child, we didn't come up this way. It was a big city then. We had streetcars and everything here in Okmulgee, Oh, they went way out,
Do you remember Okmulgee, early Okmulgee, when you were a child?
Yes, I do.
What did the downtown look like?
Oh, my goodness, that was a metropolis. They had streetcars, and they had stores where stores are not anymore. And they had, this was a busy place. This was one of the oldest cities in the state,
What were some of the main businesses downtown?
Well, I can't remember the names, but grocery stores, I think I would like to say they were in the minimum, whereas they're in the maximum now. The huge markets are taking over now.
Right.
They're swallowing up the little ones, but there were a lot of individually owned grocery stores. But the dry goods stores, the hardware stores, the things that were building homes, and they sold, they didn't have ready-made garments, Some, yes, but Muskogee was the main center for fashion and so forth. Eufaula was a big town. And have you been to Eufaula?
Yes, ma'am.
Mm-hmm. That is that's a historical place. Now they've kept their town. They haven't let it go down. They haven't. I can't think of a trading place unless it's out toward my cousin's church out west on number 9.
Where did you start school?
Pardon?
Where did you start the school?
North of Dustin, just north of the county line. It's hardly a mile. Let's see. The school was called the Junction because 2 railroads converged right west of the school, just hardly a quarter of a mile.
Was it just a country school?
Yes.
One room?
2
rooms.
2-room school. 2-room school. Big grade school. It was a big schoolhouse. Had a 5-acre yard, I believe. And it stayed there until the consolidated school of all the, 5 grade schools. They just graduate. There was no way to run into aunts and stay with her, or there was no way to drive in every day and go to high school. When they graduated, they were either sent away. Now, Indians were fortunate that way. They could go away to boarding school.
Did you go to boarding school?
Oh, no. My father never let me go a day. My older sisters and brothers went. Because when they got to grade school, they went to school no matter where. They went to Bacon, they went to Eufaula boarding school. They could go just so far there, too. And they went to Bacon, they went to Haskell. And at that time, Uchee boarding school would send, they had the program that they have now. They had a lot of room there and not that many grade school children going. And they sent some of them that finished if they wanted to stay. And then when the athletic program began to grow naturally, that's the Papa wanted them. And they started that really. And now you follow, it hasn't been too long since they've been doing that here. But, well, I speak in terms now of 20 years as being not long ago. That's a lifetime for you. But that's where I started. I had wonderful teachers.
Did you go through, who were your teachers at that school?
Well, my first one was Miss Wilbanks. Miss Owens, rather. Well, I'm thinking of married name now. Miss Owens. And then Miss Ethel Cooper. And the one who left the greatest impression and inspiration with me was Lucy Watts from Greenwood, Arkansas. She was a lady, she was cultured, she was just everything. She was refined, she knew about music, she did all those things, and I went to Dustin for my middle grades then because they were beginning to push us. And that's one of the mistakes in my life because they pushed me into a social group too old for me. And especially when I got into high school with these youngsters that went to Graham High School. I went to Dustin though the first year. I was hardly, and I had summer school. They had a summer semester in Dustin, 2 summers long, so we had a large school population south of the river, or the Canadian River. And they were wanting to go, and of course some were old enough to go, you know, in a high school. There I was. Well, the 7th grade, the 8th grade, I had math, I had to take that. English was no big problem because they pushed me the last 2 years in grade school, and I was just a little tight. And, but my father was willing, and it was easy for me. It was easy. That's why they chose me, I guess. And, math, of course, I wasn't quite old enough to really grasp all the things like square root. Now, that was a mystery to me. And my doctor, Dr. Watts.
What year did you graduate from high school?
I graduated in 1924.
And you say you went to Stillwater?
Mm-hmm.
Same year?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I did. I had finished everything but Oklahoma Constitution, and I had that in the 8th grade. They quit having that. That's one of the Dustin subjects I had in the summertime, and that was in the 8th grade, so they just gave me advanced standing exam in that in a university. I went there in the summer, and they gave that to me, and I passed it.
What did you study at the university?
What did I study? Well, I went to be a cute little gym teacher. That's what I went to be. I was an athlete and a swimmer, and you know, at home we had a lot of ranch lakes, and one my dad gave to us and cleaned it out and had a fence around it so we could learn how to swim, and we had them all around, you know, for the cattle, but not around Snake Canyon. No, that was offbeat. Well, the West Pasture, if we ever were caught going over there, the one that we really wanted to use, we were grounded. Our horse was turned loose in West Pasture, 2 miles away from home. Our saddle was locked up, and we couldn't go any place unless we went with our parents for given time. So we didn't go over there.
Did you stay in a dormitory or a sorority?
Well, dormitory the first year.
Which one?
It was just the only dormitory for girls.
What was the name of it?
It was Newton then.
Newton.
It's torn down now, and it's a science building. Lydia Newton.
Was Gardner Hall?
Huh?
Was Gardner Hall a girls' dorm at that time?
Yes, they named it that. Yes.
Okay.
After that. Oh, that was her maiden name. Yes, that's it. Miss Newton. Yes, that was her maiden name, Gardner.
Gardner Hall.
But they were calling it Newton.
Okay, Gardner Hall's still there.
It's still there. East side.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, they told me they tore it down. I've been
They remodeled it. They were going to, but they remodeled
Oh, Gardner Hall's still there.
Well, we called it Newton Hall. Now that it clicks, that's been a long time ago. No, we called it Newton Hall.
I went to school there in '64.
Oh, is that right? Well, that's still a long time ago.
I had classes.
40 years before.
I went to class in Old William.
Is it science now? Is that, are they going to convert it to science?
I don't know.
Well, now this is what has been said. Now I went to homecoming, just to the sorority. I didn't go to the football game at all, and I went there for a special reason, and I did that. And then it was cold as cold could be, so I didn't go out there.
Could you describe the inside of your room at Newton Hall?
And Newton Hall, well, it was about like this one right here. A little wider,
What, 10, 12 feet?
and a little hall, little keyhole that went instead of just an open off the hall. And I don't remember much because I didn't stay the full year there. You understand? In May, after I was being looked over, I was invited to visit my sorority.
Which sorority?
Tried out.
Right out.
And so I didn't stay there, but it was wider and had a little hall about so to the hallway. It was nice, you know. That way you just didn't open your door out. Well, I was an athlete there right off the bat. I was a swimmer, and of course in the summers when I went up there in the summer, I took swimming because I wanted to be a gym teacher. And that first year taught me that, well, in a few years, those teachers that have been here a long time, their cute little shorts just don't look so cute now, you know. After the second year, of course, I went on. Of course, I liked speech. I had speech in high school and Spanish in high school. And of course, we had to take foreign language naturally. And it was easy for me. And so I liked drama and those things. Of course, country kids in small high schools do. That's all they have to do. And so basketball, that was a thing for me. That's all we had to do. And of course, we had volleyball too. Now that's getting to be a thing of the past that's been brought back to life. When they did that in the Olympics, I just played right along with them. Only they had a little different way in the Olympics, you know. But anyway, I was going for that pretty strongly. And well, I was young. I was younger than those people in college. My land of living. I had to play by myself, really. That's why what threw me into those individual things, really. But in my sophomore year, I decided to go for speech and drama and science. I like science too.
What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 27.
Who gave the commencement speech?
Pardon?
Who gave the commencement speech?
Who gave the commencement speech? Lord. Let's see. The governor. Now, who was the governor at that time?
27. The one before Murray. Was it Trapp? No, he was.
I could dig in my program. It's
Henry
in
S.
that storeroom
Was
in
it
there.
Henry S. Johnston?
Johnson.
Henry S. Johnston.
Johnson. It was Johnson.
After you.
And after I graduated, then what happened to Johnson? my father-in-law to be was up there in the house when he was treated as he was. Yes, it was Governor Johnson. Now then the one who introduced him and the one who said goodbye at the same time was Robertson. She was my speech teacher when I first went to A&M. We still say that when we go up there, A&M. There are too many state universities. We just still say that was it. Well, it's the best known agriculture and mechanical college in the United States at that time. That's the classification it had.
But it was so lonesome out there, that prairie country and my being.
Did you have classes in Old Central?
Oh, yes.
That's one of our state museums now.
Mhm.
It's been restored. After college, what did you do?
Well, I got married. I taught in Sapulpa. And I got married. And my husband was in the American National Bank there.
What's his name?
Glenn Thomas.
Glenn Thomas. And you married what year?
28.
How about the Depression in the 1930s? What were you doing?
I was teaching.
In Sepulveda?
No. I taught in 1928.
Okay.
And then I had a baby in a year, and my husband died, and he was 2 years old when his father died, and I stayed with him until he was school age, and then I taught. And I was in that depression, of course, and I started teaching at Calvin. And boy, talk about getting a job was the main thing. They even ask you how much of your insurance from your dead husband is possible, and then my father's ranch, played a big part, and my mother's property out here at Fairville played a big part, and so I still lived in Sepulpa, and so my cousin over at Holdenville, of course, was a court clerk, county court clerk, and then he had a lot of property. Didn't help me a bit, but he helped himself because he was a politician, and he had a lot of and that's where I got my job. It wasn't that I wasn't qualified. It was in fact I was too qualified. I had my degree, and that was another thing. Today it's the same thing. They will hire a bachelor degree teacher before they'll hire a master's. And when they begin to look at the board and see that their accreditation will depend on what quality teachers they have, then they'll hire. But a PhD now just has to go somewhere else. Upper.
There's one area I'd like to get into. What qualifications, for lack of a better word, did Chief Cox use to select the people to draw up the new Constitution? How did he select the fine people?
Well, number one, they had to be Creeks. Nobody else. They had to be Creeks. And they had to have a certain status of education, experience with public relations, and experience in writing data. Now, data is used, and it can be, but my callings say data. He liked writers, and he liked people of present day vocabulary applied, and he wanted people who knew the Creek way of life. He wanted education in there, of course, naturally, and he certainly did want people who understood the education. The higher they went didn't bother him, but the people who had a good, solid background in education, who could write, who knew grammar, and who had a vocabulary, a versatile vocabulary. And he also wanted to have people who knew something about writing constitutions and writing legal things, and he wanted you to know the history of the Creek people. He also wanted you to know the everyday Creek person. He wanted you to have a sympathy for the Creek people in this way, not to build the down and outers, but have something which would help them build themselves back up to, so to say. That I remember that number one when he started talking about hospitals and things like that, and getting programs that would send them away, of course, from the bottle, and of course the veterans organizations, of course, and his experience in the business world and his organization background, his union experiences. Now and he's a good politician, and he's a good person to really get across with people. Now he knows how to do an awful lot of negotiating. That's where his union experience comes in. All right, now he's been a power, and that's the way he studies. He studies people, and and of course he was raised by his mother, of course, and then he became the boss when he was 16 years old. And the people, the Indian people, now his relatives all around Okmulgee here were Indian, outside of his father's people. I don't think there were too many of them. They were white, of course. But it's had a tremendous impact on his growing up, because they've been here to help his mother, and by counseling. That's the main thing. And Cox was making his living for him and his family.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about writing the Constitution.
Well, we need Mr. Harley Little here to help us on this. You won't believe what I tell you. Well, we had a script. They had a thick. I think they had made an effort. Now, I never did. He said we were cautioned from the judge Bryant in Washington, D.C. to look it over. He didn't throw it out, but it didn't have some vital things that Creek people had nothing to do with it. And they simply didn't have a referendum. That's what it was. Of course, everybody knows that a constitution in a democratic society must have that. And the Creeks are it's the member of the 5 civilized tribes who was known for its government, the bicameral form of government, And the Cherokees was something else. The Choctaws, Chickasaws, Seminoles, all of them had some other strong point. And the Creeks were found with this bicameral system of government. With the rocks, they even had the color rocks. Now that I heard from my grandfather McIntosh. He said that they had white stones and they had red stones. And somebody got a soft red stone or two to make up for something they lost, something, and it started getting on the white stones. They had to throw those bad stones away. Some little thing, But anyway. These traders and the people who were exploring this country in the southern states found this among these Indians. They were cultured. They could speak another language besides their. In our case, it was French and Spanish. More French, I think, than Spanish from the way it goes. Anyway, they found this government, and that's what's been the historical value of our tribe. They've always had this in the home. In the home they have this. They'll have the older ones taking care and making the decision for those small ones, but the little one has a chance to speak up and say his piece. And if he's in the wrong, he's punished or he's taken care of. But he has his right to say, And if it's all right, the older ones are thanked. They're not condemned for telling a lie on them, but they'll be cautioned the next time, or they'll be punished instead if they tell a lie on their little siblings, and so forth. Well, anyhow, that's we followed this.
This is August 28, 1984. I'm Joe Todd. This is an interview with Mrs. Virginia Watson Thomas. Mrs. Thomas, where were you born?
I was born in Oklahoma. Oklahoma, Okmulgee County.
And when's your birthday?
December 10th, 1908.
And who's your father?
Sandy Watson.
Sandy Watson. And your mother?
Anna Howell
Howell.
McIntosh.
What kind of work did your father do?
He was a cattle raiser, rancher, hereford cattle, northeast of Dustin.
In Okmulgee County.
Yes, northwest of Dustin.
Okay. Okay. And you were born on the ranch?
Oh, yes.
Okay. What were your chores on the ranch as a little girl?
I think taking care of myself mostly. Taking care of myself, and then perhaps seeing about my pony sometime. And taking care of my room. That was all.
Okay.
We had a lot of help.
What blood quantum Greek are you?
7/16.
7/16. Is that on your mother's side?
Both.
Both. Have you heard any removal stories about the Trail of Tears?
Yes, I have. It's handed down, straight down, and I knew my great-grandmother, my maternal great-grandmother, who made the walk when she was a teenager.
What did she say about the removal? What stories would she tell you?
Well, she, of course, didn't tell me because I was small, but she would give me things that were given to her, and she had managed to pack small things like a little silver bell she brought from there. That was in my possession. And she told me about her little dogs that all had French names because she was part French. My great-grandmother, of course. My grandmother was dead, but my great-grandmother lived.
And do you remember any stories in particular that they would say about?
Yes,
what happened on the trail?
she talked about the hardships in that. They were the gruesome things which left an impression on me, and about their hardships in obtaining food, the food that they were accustomed to. They were agriculture people, people who had gardens in the warm Southland in Alabama. That's where they were from. They had, the Tallapoosa County was nearby, of course. They weren't exactly all in there. My mother's people weren't, but my father's were. Tallapoosa County, but grandmother Abby Lowell, grandmother Abby Lowell was the one who would tell me about the nice little things and the plants that she had obtained some way. People had exchanged plants and vines that they had brought. In what way, I don't remember if I were ever told. But they had Madeira vines and things of that sort did not exist in this country at that time. But she had what we would call a patio today in her, between two large log houses. And that was rather a backyard thing, which was a patio where everybody met. And that Madeira vine went clear across and formed an arbor. And then she had lilacs, white lilacs, which did not exist here at all. Then they had a plum that was rare. Some, they have grown wild now, but they're all over Fountainhead State Park. That was part of her estate down in, of course, you've been there. So her remains lie with a tall tombstone at campground number 4 as you enter, make the entrance there. It's just to the left as you enter. And she had a large home there, they were 3 different buildings there. But they had so many things, plants and things that the other people on my paternal side did not grow. And that's because 40 miles today even makes a difference in what they raise and what they can do there. However, that's been stopped because of our beautiful Fountainhead Park, which is a memorial to my maternal side of the house. I love it because of that.
Mm-hmm.
But she would tell about sometimes they would step up the pace in their removal. They came by boats a lot. And then, of course, on the riverbanks, they'd come to the riverbanks at intervals, the men and people who were carrying things in wagons and whatever else they had, drags, I believe they said drags. I never did know quite what that was. Indian poles, no. They had something else, but I don't remember. But the women, a lot of the women and children rode in boats. And presumably up the Mississippi River. And then when they have tributaries, like maybe the Arkansas, and that was a vicious river. And she talked about the Arkadelphia, and she used to say something like that, you know. And then she was very handy with the French names because she was familiar with them. And to what extent, of course, that was just something to me, you know. I was 5 years old when she died in 1913. But I remember well, she had pretty blue eyes and was as white as anybody. And on the roll, she was placed as an Indian because they had become wise. And they would be restricted and no taxes. They had known that already in Alabama. Just the short time they lived there right after the white people began to sectionize the land there, as they were preparing them to put them in a compound if they didn't agree to go. That's the way they did. And that's the way they went to Georgia, was in a compound. Now history is very light on that when they begin to tell why some of them were just over the line in Georgia. But that was today. Some of the people who are going out for higher degrees, masters, I think, touched up on it first, and now the PhDs go after it a lot, you know, people with special creative work, creative writing, and researchers go into that, of course.
When did the removal begin? What year? Do you?
Well, it began in the 30s, 1830s. The movement began before that, but we'd have to go back and check research. Because there was a little, it was scattered more. They began working on those who rebelled a lot. And then they worked with those who finally saw that they were defeated. They offered them this and they offered them that. Of course, they gave the Cherokees that they were
Do you have
Yeah.
next?
yes, oh my goodness, yes.
Now,
Okay.
Well, I'll tell you, maybe you could just remember it, but we had an awful hard time. We had a very loudmouth. You mentioned the individual from Muskogee a while ago. He was one of our opposing people. But they had we had 2 factions, 2 opposing, 2 foreign, 2 Chief Cox named those. You weren't here at that time, weren't you? You heard everything. No. Well, you got here about the tail end of it.
yeah, it
was
blown over and cooled
Oh,
down.
yes, you were here. And there were 2, and one wasn't so strong against us. He was just there, bless his heart. He was like that. And they were gentlemanly up to a point. And then I was supposed to be the neutral one, and I was a woman. All right. So I said no 3 times. I just hadn't been back here but 2 years, and I wanted to rest. I wanted to travel. I never have traveled to where I wanted to go. Anyway, but I began to think then that after the third time, I said, well, I just don't believe I'm qualified because I haven't been here in 35 years and things have developed, and you've developed so many educated people who've been right here. Now they know what's going on. No, it's not that. It's the Constitution. They kept coming back, and then they called me up here, and Chief talked to me, and we had a meeting. And I thought, well, maybe God intended for me, giving me the power of making my living for 43 years in teaching speech, speaking 3 languages, and maybe this is my calling. Because I'd been to Washington on immigration education, and giving very much what I did up there. So I said, well, all right, I'll try. But they had to vote on me. They had to take me here and there and let the people hear whom they were going to select. Well, I was supposed to be the neutral one and be the chair. So they just locked. There are 2 against 2, they were very much against each other already. And finally, it just got so they had to decide. The judge had just given dates. I mean, he had given dates. And it just got to a point where they had to make a decision, so they went off and came back. And I said, now, I'll step down. I said that 3 times. I said, I'll step down because I said, you came after me. Now, if you could put somebody in this place that you could go on. And they had some more people up, but they just kept throwing them off but me, and now here I was. So, Malcolm Fish, Miss Lewis, came in, and, he and Robert came in. That side put me up, and they had 4 on their side, I think. And Mr. Leader from Holdenville just stepped down. He said, well, you have, he knew me from when I taught him Calvin, And so he said, you can't find anyone better. He said, she came down here and beat the tail off of us in speech contests, county-wise. Anyway, so anyway, he knew my folks, and that didn't count. But anyway, they said, I kept telling them they had the best chair there, and that was Bryant Jesse. That was on the other side, the one that didn't want the Constitution. I said, he's the best one. I said, he knows all the people that I don't know. And I said, he's a pastor. I said, he's a minister, a Baptist minister. And I said, of course, Methodists will say that, no, we wanted our preacher up there, And I said, but you have the best one. And I said, knowing Creek people, they want a man to be a leader. And I'm a Creek, and I feel the same way. ERA? I feel the same way. And so, men can do things. There are places, someplace that we're not supposed to be. Now, that's just the way I feel.
Mrs. Thomas, I'm going to have to come back.
Yeah, you can tell her. She's got